Good morning, everybody. Sorry for missing the first part of the program, the introduction. I got wrapped up in all the juicy things in the news that have come up today, and we're going to be talking about price controls. Why are we going to talk about it? Because we have a hint now of what Kamala Harris's economic plan will be. She's supposed to come out tomorrow and hash it out. But already people are kind of putting whispers out there. How are they going to address things? How they're going to try to figure things out? And it's very interesting. So there's a lot of news to cover, but we're going to be focusing on really price control. So the Biden administration has already talked about rent control, and while they haven't actually done it yet, that's was one of his big pushes to address housing here in the United States. And now that he's no longer running, we don't know if the Harris campaign is continuing with that. But apparently, they're going to be pushing for price controls on food and groceries. So we're going to dive into that. But first of all, let's take a look at the news. What's happening in the economy? Because the big news out is inflation has dropped. And a lot of it depends on how you slice and dice it. So this is year over year. So if you compare July of last year to July of this year, it's at 2.9% per the official CPI, which excludes food, groceries, housing, and energy. Most of the big things where inflation has boomed doesn't take into account the financial costs of credit and debt, which again is higher than ever through auto insurance and home insurance. So the way the inflation works is it works its way through the economy, so it hits one thing after another, and so that's why people they say one thing just all of a sudden take off. And when you ask people about car insurance, they're like, "Oh my gosh, my car insurance went up like crazy." That's because the inflationary factors caught up with inflation. What's next? It'll continue, but again, the government numbers of 2.9% make people scratch their head on what they're measuring. It might have gone up less, but it's still going up. And over the last 4 years, overall inflation has climbed dramatically. So there's a lot of effects throughout the economy through this. So going to go ahead and start with the first article here. This is from the Epic Times. So they've been coming up with a lot of economic news, and U.S. living standards in grave danger. So what's happening? People are buying less. They're looking for ways to save money. Um, and again, the main thing here, inflation cooled lower than expected. Again, this is based on the CPI for 1 month in July. Um, so it focuses on the 12-month trend from July to July. It's actually up from June to July, if you believe it. So it's all how. This is a funny thing with statistics. They can take headlines and run with it just because the numbers seem to drop for 1 month, month to month. But if you look to June, July, the numbers are actually up. So it's funny. So here's a little change in trends. Again, inflation per month, 5% down, up. So right here they're saying it's cooling when the numbers actually going up month to month. So again, it really is. It's like anything in the economy; it bounces around a lot. So overall, you might see a cooling trend, but the numbers are still climbing going into July, which is a little bit of a head scratcher. So and this news is being plastered all over the place. We'll see long term what it actually does. And so here it talks about the CPI, which is what the measure they're looking at, what the number the government loves to use. It ignores housing prices, which are at an all-time high now. They've kind of capped out up off around 426,000 per home nationally. So again, the hour employment is freezing up. Inflation is still taking its toll on employment, which is up. It climbed 0.2% to 4.1% unemployment. And that's the official number, which, again, the participation rate is still lower than ever. There's plenty of problems with that number as well. So when you CNN did a poll, and they have a link to the poll right here, 2,000 people to find out where they stood on their personal finances. Here's the number: 40% struggling to pay their bills, up from 28% only 3 years ago. This 40% is higher than in the middle of the Great Recession, 2008 and 2009, where people were losing their homes through foreclosures. So again, this is a brutal number. And when people look at their own finances, this is what they're seeing. 2/3 say that the number one issue is cost of living and paying their bills. Bill Clinton famously said, "It's economy, stupid. You've got to focus on the economy." Average American is spending $1,000 per month more than 3 years ago. That's a huge hit. Wages have not even come close to that. This is just to pay living expenses, not additional expenses. That was according to Moody's. It all goes to a dramatic decline in real statistics or real household income, which again is from the Department of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So more and more people are taking additional jobs, and this is having a larger effect on minorities, especially Latinos and Black Americans. So people are seeing this. We're seeing more and more people. I mean, the job numbers have increased to some extent, but there's more people taking on second and third jobs, and they're counting these part-time jobs as new jobs, and that's where most of the growth in jobs has been from multiple part-time jobs, people, government jobs, and healthcare. If you take those out, our jobs numbers are atrocious. It's absolutely horrible, which is why was it 2 weeks now? You had this huge financial hit with the stock market crash based on the labor numbers, the unemployment report, because it's not good. 70% report they've cut back on spending and changed their grocery buying habits as well. So again, the costs are everywhere around us, and so any slight decrease isn't going to reverse the last 4 years of inflation. It's only going to continue. And to be fair, both parties are at fault. Through COVID, the Trump administration did what was recommended and spent money like crazy, threw money at the economy, tried to hold things together. But I think the damage caused by the shutdowns, by what people thought we should do through COVID, is still raging in our economy, and we haven't gotten back to normal because the government's still spending more than ever from COVID spending. People want the COVID spending to be the new normal, and even though revenues are higher than ever, they want to spend. So again, there's a story about a newspaper. A lot of things took a huge hit from COVID and still aren't coming back. So again, interesting story about a New England paper. One of their biggest sources of revenue was from arts venues. So art institutions, a lot of legal clinics, there's a lot of different things that helped people, especially people struggling, the people with less income, never came back. Traffic at museums is half of what it was, and as a result, philanthropy is down as well. So there's less for advertising. So this newspaper is looking to shut down. So again, talking about the jobs numbers, July 20. Well, this is everybody going back to work from COVID. So this is not real growth. But you had a period looked like high growth, and then from 22, 23, and going into 24, overall the jobs have been dropping. This is new jobs, but the numbers have been decreasing for the last couple years, really since January of 2022 when everybody went back. And so again, this is consumer spending. So here you have COVID, it went up for a little bit and it hasn't really recovered. So I could spend way too much time on this article. Again, they talk about money supply, but I'm going to move on to the next article and talks about real-time companies making huge differences here and not in a good way. So Paramount cuts its workforce by 15%. They just launched this, and a lot of companies are trimming like crazy to try to survive what's expected in the economy. There's a lot of uncertainty in the economy, and a 50% cut is across the board. So from CEOs all the way down to the average worker, this is going to be pretty brutal. So they're doing it in 3 phases, and to strengthen their business, they're trimming hundreds of jobs. So again, don't know how many numbers of employees that will be laid off, but it's to save 500 million in annual costs, and a lot of companies are doing the same thing. They're just trimming like crazy because they have to stay competitive. So the next article we're just going to be able to touch on. This actually came out a day or two ago. This is from Home Depot. Now the interesting thing about Home Depot, it's kind of a bellwether for people spending, improving their homes, DIY projects, and they're really they just cut their earnings drastically, expected earnings, because people aren't spending money. They're not spending on big home improvements or projects, and so they're taking a big hit on as well. But we'll continue this and dive into this article when we come back from this break. Welcome back, everybody. And just continuing with this article from Home Depot, they're seeing a huge decrease in sales. They estimated sales before was a 1% decrease. Now they've increased that to between 3 to 4%. Last year's for their established stores, it fell 3.6%. And so that's where they're changing their perspectives. Main thing is people just don't have the money. People are pulling back on home projects. They're cutting back in spending overall, and thank goodness for Home Depot, most of their sales come from housing professionals that are out there building. So again, they do this for their job, and so they get a lot of money from new construction, which is still going, and trying to keep pace with demand. But again, this is something hitting and businesses across the country. And ironically, we have a brand new Home Depot coming in just next to me, but that's going to be an issue as far as affecting other local businesses as well. So jumping to the next article, and here we go. This is an interesting article. We were talking about Google and how they're actually looking at breaking up part of Google, forcing Google to sell off part of their business, either separate out their AdWords or get them to spin off Chrome, or try to break down their monopoly that they have. And this is one of the biggest dangers of it. So Google has been manipulating their search results regarding the Trump assassination attempt. The media in general has buried, and nobody's talking about, the attempted assassination of the president just happened a month ago. So that is huge, and people aren't talking about it. And almost every single ad I come out, people come out and they're claiming that the Trump campaign is all about hate, and that's what I keep seeing and hearing when they just had an assassination attempt on Trump. This is a huge, the last time something like this happened was Ronald Reagan 40 years ago, against the presidential candidate or president. And Google is going out of their way to censor it. So this is the problems where we have monopolies, where we have too much media control in the hands of a few. Again, the main part that's really came down as a judge ruled that Google search is an illegal monopoly, and here's the problem with monopolies. A huge issue there. So they're being investigated by Congress now. And it's not just Republicans going after Google, there's Democrats going after them as well. So again, their excuse right now is that they limited searches to hypothetical violence, but this is an actual story about violence that took place. It's a huge issue, and it really seems that Google will pick and choose which stories they censor or don't censor. So again, a huge point of concern here. We do not want big tech censoring our speech, and it's been going on during the Biden administration and continuing on. And I think that's something most people can agree, that we don't want big tech censoring information. So that's not a free press. That is the opposite of a free press. Moving on here. This goes back a ways, where, again, we had the president of Harvard and MIT. I believe MIT resigned when they had the protests going on and they were dragged on the Capitol Hill. Now the president of Columbia finally resigned, mainly due to criticism from their reactions in the wake of the October 7th attacks. They had huge rise in anti-Semitism as a result of that, and by people supporting Hamas. So the university, we just saw this in UCLA, where they were, and I just talked about this last week, but UCLA had a zone for protesters in the heart of campus. So anybody that was either Jewish or didn't agree with them. So they allowed Jews that agreed with their point of view that and their protests against Israel, but you couldn't even enter this area. And they allowed these students to sit there and tag people, so they had to put on a wristband that showed that they agreed with the protesters. And if you didn't have that wristband, you could not enter this section of campus right in the heart of campus. And it's just hard to believe that this is where our elite universities have gone. They're allowing discrimination. They're allowing viewpoint discrimination. It's all very illegal. And a judge smacked him down and held that it was racist and illegal, which it was. This is in California. So the president of Columbia University, again, one of the many university presidents that was allowing or encouraging a lot of these protests, she recently stepped down. Major reason, donors withholding donations. And this is how really the pressure has been put. The congressional hearings only highlighted the issue, but it was when the donors really stopped and said, look, we're not going to give any more money to your university unless you guys do an about face here. And again, this becomes such an issue for Shafiq that she eventually resigned, or just announced her resignation. So I think it's a good thing to hold universities accountable. They're one of the least accountable institutions in the United States. And again, the last thing we want is racial injustice. Nobody wants this against any group. And when you have the Jews being targeted across the country in major universities, it's a travesty. It really is a travesty. Think whatever you will, but targeting individuals for their viewpoints, or targeting Jews and allowing the anti-Semitic messages that we've seen across our universities is atrocious, in my opinion. So moving on to our main story. And this one doesn't have as much detail as the next story, but again, this is announced, the Harris campaign announced that they're going to announce her economic agenda tomorrow. So we have a special guest coming tomorrow on the show, so we won't be, it will be Friday afternoon, so we'll be talking about it next week. What is she actually proposing? But there are things being leaked out. So in this article, Washington Examiner looked at who she's bringing on to get an idea of what she's doing and where she's going to be heading. So talking about this, her focus is helping the middle class and working class and low income households. And that's not a surprise, as most of their proposals target the rich, tax the rich, etc. But they're saying, look at the close economic advisors that she's hiring. Okay, fair enough. So Brian Deese, former director of President Joe Biden's Economic Council, Michael Powell, former deputy national security advisor, and Dean Milson, who's been with her since she was senator. So these are the people putting together her economic plan. Who are these people? Now, this article does not pick bones here, so take it with a grain of salt. This is a more conservative paper attacking these people. But Deese has advocated environmental, social, and governance policies. And again, this would they're saying that she would encourage Harris to keep pursuing the goal of banning fracking in U.S. oil fields. This is after she just changed her position in Pennsylvania on fracking. So if she's hiring these people as her, advisors, again, Harris is trying to flip-flop on a lot of issues here. But is it sincere? Well, look at who she's hiring. Look at the team that she's building around here, what their positions are, what they're going to be advocating. So that was Harris's position as California senator, and what she's been promoting throughout her time as VP. But again, banning fracking would devastate U.S. industry and cause gasoline prices to skyrocket, hurting Pennsylvania, which is a must-win state for Trump and Harris. And she's also a high tax liberal, proposed raising corporate taxes significantly, perhaps doubling them as a percentage of GDP. So again, they are arguing against lowering the corporate tax from 35 to 21%. So we were one of the highest. 21% put us kind of in the average for countries as far as corporate tax rate. And she's arguing that, or has argued that it's not effective in raising business investment. However, other data demonstrates that she's wrong on that. So really the question is, do we add more taxes on corporations and high wealth individuals? And here's the real kicker though, you can't tax your way out of our economic deficit. You just can't. You could take all the money from all the billionaires in the United States and it would pay down the national debt by 1/8. So again, that's not going to be very helpful. You could sit there and rob them blind, take everything they own, and it would put a small dent in the national debt. That's how big the national debt is. It's insane. So moving on, Pyle. Again, a lot of these people have worked for Harris for over the years. They've worked for Biden. These are the same people. She's not changing anything up, which should be a surprise. It's the continuation of the Biden administration and their policies for the most part, with some different focuses, but it really is the same focus. So he worked as a National Security Council under Biden. Again, he's a fervent believer in the green energy movement. So the new Green New Deal that's come out, again, he believes U.S. industry can be powered by green fuels, essentially targeting the oil companies. So again, the idea that we can get all of our energy from green fuels, or most of it, is right now pie in the sky. Again, we have the Biden administration moving to phase out all electric car or all gas-powered vehicles or new sales by 2035. Again, we don't have the infrastructure for it. The government has had plans to build charging infrastructure, which has failed massively. And if you look at Germany, the industrial section is in recession currently because they pivoted too soon to green energy. And again, there's going to be a lot of increased cost of that. That's going to hurt our manufacturing and our competitiveness throughout the world. Then you turn to Millicent. She was her chief economic advisor and legislative director for Senator Harris. So again, you had criminal justice reform being pushed, and she was an active proponent of the devastating shutdown policies that we've talked about, how much harm they've done, not only to the economy, but also to children and schools. So again, if you can definitely look at who her team is, who she's building, and then moving on, we have an interesting article here from Reuters. And Reuters is a much more friendly news source, so try to be fair here. But they focus on her focus is to be on grocery costs, getting a child tax credit passed, which Republicans are already trying to do the same thing. So the Democrats, again, that was done in bipartisan manner back in February, but again, Schumer decided to play games with it and drop it on the Republicans at the last moment without any discussion or back and forth, knowing it would be shot down, knowing it would be opposed, and the Republicans obliged and played politics back. So again, the fact that we don't have something passed this year is just pure to, blatant politics. But both sides are saying they will pass and increase the child tax credit for next year. So nothing too different here. But here's the key thing that I pulled from this: the focus on lowering the cost of groceries, housing, and healthcare. So how is she going to do that? Healthcare has climbed for anybody paying for private insurance. And the cost of the ACA or health insurance is more expensive than ever. It's just because there's huge government subsidies. Most people don't see those costs, but again, it's a huge expensive cost to the federal budget. How is she going to affect housing? Again, we're going to see a lot of this, but this plan of lowering costs and price gouging is a huge problem. So when you talk about price gouging, the way to they're attacking the people providing the goods. So the Biden administration or campaign came out and said we're going to implement rent control nationally. Horrible idea. And why would they do that? Because it shows that they're doing something rather than nothing. But rent control has the opposite effect. Landlords build less, they maintain properties, and very soon you have huge. Just look at New York, look at San Francisco. Most places a lot of places had rent control in the 70s and got rid of them due to the huge damage it caused to the local rental markets. So this is what they're saying. This is the big issue here, and again, it's buried deeper in the article. Call for a federal law banning corporations from setting excessive prices, so that's price controls, and call out the practices of meat processing companies, so more government regulation and price controls. So it sounds good, these big evil corporations are setting prices too high. But when you do price controls, when you put price controls in effect, this is socialism 101. And this is why in the Soviet Union, they had huge lines for food. We would have Gorbachev and other major dignitaries that would come to the United States, and they would believe it was all show in our grocery stores. They could not believe that we actually had food overflowing and that we just would throw away when it got bad in our grocery stores. They said, there's no way you have this much food. It's called the free market. Putting price controls on food might lower the prices temporarily, but it's going to create shortages. That's what it always does. So again, it closely mirrors that of President Joe Biden. And again, this word is not official, but they're getting information from her team, and they're saying it's same values, different vision between Harris and Biden. And again, we'll see what she announces and what she's going to be focusing on. So I want to kind of take a break here. So she plans to cut the costs of rental housing and home ownership, and as well as groceries. So that's really what she's going to target. So I think it's a matter of concern here. How is she going to target these? The only way the government really can, which is rent controls, price controls, and that is not good for the economy. That's a huge way to distort and cause a lot of problems. So we're going to focus on some interesting videos when we come back. Try to have a little bit of fun with this, but we'll stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, and we're going to finish off with some fun videos. So it's just so funny when you go to rent control and price controls. It's like the 70s. Hold the phone. The 70s are calling for their economic policies. So again, this is straight from the Carter administration. This is still straight from Socialism 101 for rent control and price controls. It's been shown to be a horrible idea time and time, but given enough time, and people will go back to the same ideas and failed ideas that have failed across the world. So let's all to it. We're gonna watch some videos, and this should be informative.
In 2021, Americans experienced inflation rates not seen since the early 1980s. In response, some called for price controls on key goods to protect everyday Americans. But using price controls to reduce inflation is like responding to cold weather by breaking a thermometer. Just as thermometers respond to temperature, prices are an indicator of underlying supply and demand. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, prices of used cars skyrocketed. But that wasn't due to greedy car owners. A computer chip shortage limited the supply of new cars. So more drivers chose to keep their used cars instead. Reduced supply meant higher prices. Implementing price controls might appear to reduce prices, but fewer people would sell their cars, and cars for sale would sell instantly. The result would be that many more people wouldn't be able to buy a car at all. Just as breaking a thermometer doesn't cause the temperature to rise, controlling prices doesn't cause inflation to fall. Instead, as history and basic economics show, price controls produce shortages that are far more painful than the original price increases.
So it's interesting to mention the early 80s. What was going on in the early 80s? And this is true now. The pain in the economy that we're seeing now is not going to stop cold when we elect a new president, if Harris or Trump. So whoever gets elected is going to be dealing with this moving forward, because in the early 80s, this is when you had the high inflation and socialist policies under President Carter. And 81, Ronald Reagan took over. So January of 81, and it took time. It wasn't until 84 that he was able to have the Morning in America campaign telling people, hey, it's been 4 years now. Is your life better? And by 84, Reaganomics had taken hold, and you'd had a huge change. But in the early 80s, you still had high inflation. You still had all kinds of things going out of control, because it takes time, years, to correct bad policy and bad planning. So if we want shortages, the greatest way to do it is rent control and price control. So jumping to the next article here, or next video here.
Whenever rental prices are considered unaffordable, many see rent control as the answer to make housing more attainable. Rent control is a system where the government restricts how much a landlord can increase rent. And the thinking goes, if the government has the ability to regulate rental prices, shouldn't they? Well, maybe not. The problem with rent control is that it ultimately manipulates supply and demand and ends up creating a self-destructive chain reaction in the rental market. Whenever the government caps rental prices, demand skyrockets. After all, artificially low prices attract more renters, so the newly rent-controlled units get snatched up quickly. Where the problem begins is that by restricting rental prices, landlords inevitably decide it isn't financially feasible to rent units under rent control. Because of this, many landlords will convert their rental units into sellable condos, and other landlords will stop building new rental properties. This causes the rental supply to actually decline, and apartments that are not rent controlled become even more expensive, which was the problem in the first place. Basically, the only people who benefit from rent control are the lucky few who get in early and stay in. And because landlords have no incentive to improve or even maintain rent-controlled units, the lucky few may not be lucky for very long. At the end of the day, rent control is a band-aid that only temporarily addresses the symptoms of the problem, and only for a small number of people. But it fails to address the root of the high-cost problem, a lack of supply, and ultimately makes the problem worse by increasing the demand.
So interestingly enough, that they have these different ideas. Let's do rent control. Let's do price controls on food. Argentina just got rid of rent control under President Milei, and so yes, he's a far right winger, and he's taking, again, he is trying to take a chainsaw to the government, and they, got rid of whole departments, a huge number of departments in the federal government, and they actually, for the first time in 17 years, have a surplus that they can use to start paying down their debt, and they owe 44 billion, and it's having a huge effect on their economy. So they're finally getting ahead of things, but only by hacking and slashing their federal government. So when they stopped rent control, people expected prices to go up. But the interesting part is when you put the power back in the hands of landlords, believe it or not, people, they didn't have all the restrictions. And one of the big restrictions there is that whenever you brought someone in, it had to be for 3 years, and you couldn't evict them in the 3-year period. So if you had a bad tenant, you're stuck with them for 3 years. Didn't matter how bad they were. Didn't matter how much they destroyed the place. And this idea of tenant rights really is counterproductive. And that why would landlords rent? So a whole bunch of properties that were being held off, that were being used for other purposes, when they got rid of rent control, the supply of housing increased 140% in Argentina. And so when you had this huge increase in supply, what happened to prices? The prices went down when they got rid of rent control. They might not stay down, who knows? But you got rid of the government control, and now people are free to make agreements and get rid of bad renters, or there's consequences for being a bad renter. And it really does open up possibilities for people to innovate, to create solutions, and to talk to other people. So again, another quick video on why is rental control a horrible idea?
Meet Jessica. Jessica works at a local tech company. She likes her job, but she's always felt like she could do more. So she was very excited when she got a job offer from a tech startup in the big city. But there was one really big problem. Even with the higher salary they offered, there was no way she could afford to pay rent in the big city.
This is unfair. Greedy landlords are exploiting vulnerable renters with high prices. It should be illegal to charge this much.
This is a common demand people make, and on the surface it sounds like a good idea.
Because it is one?
Not exactly.
How'd I know that was coming?
The price of anything depends heavily on supply and demand. The reason rent is so high in most big cities is because a lot of people want to live there, but there isn't enough housing. So that means what is available is pretty expensive.
You're telling me.
Normally, when the price of something, like rent, is very high, it's a signal that there's money to be made providing that thing to others. So entrepreneurs start making more of that thing so they can make money. And the more people are making a thing, the more the price for it decreases, as the suppliers start competing with each other. But rent control ruins that.
Ruin? How could rent control ruin that?
Government already makes creating housing way more expensive than it needs to be through regulatory burdens. But when the owners can charge whatever rent seems fair to them, there's at least a chance for them to make back the money they invested and hopefully earn a profit. But when the government puts a cap on the price of housing, it becomes almost impossible to earn a profit off of it. So yeah, the very few people who manage to get rent-controlled places to live are happy with their below-market price housing. But it ultimately makes rent more expensive for everyone else, like Jessica here. Because builders know that the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. So the supply stays low, the demand stays high, and prices just keep going up.
I guess that makes sense, but if government makes all these rules that cause the price of living to get so high, why don't they just stop?
Why indeed? Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this...
So when you talk about the New York housing market, that's it. And I talk with people, that have rent-controlled housing. Again, there's plenty of stories of politicians, actors, other very famous people that have rent-controlled housing in New York City. People that they have the connections. A lot of it is who's connected, or when people get in there, they don't leave. They stay in there forever because it's so cheap compared to the market. They're like, why would I ever leave this rent-controlled apartment? And people talk about slumlords, and there's plenty of slumlords where they're just horrible landlords in themselves. But when you have rent-controlled properties, owners have no incentive to maintain a property because they can't charge more. They can't recoup their costs from investing in these properties. So you get very, very low rent in properties that are often not taken care of. And then everywhere else, the rents are much, much higher than they need to be. So again, I have someone right now that they're working, they have some income, but there's no way they can consider getting any kind of apartment on their own because it's just too expensive in New York City. And so because you have limited land and opportunities to build, it's just going to continue to be a problem. But that's the big cities. But passing rent control, again, go back, you can look at the 70s. They did this, been there, done that, and only made things worse. So they got rid of those policies, and now we're talking about bringing them back. It's like, okay, Carter administration 101. That's where we're going. So when I read the price controls, I just said, there's so much here to talk about. I really hope that's wrong. So I have one last video to share, and this is more of a funny one. But again, different examples throughout history of price controls and government control and how that has failed.
And now, great moments and unintended consequences. Part 1. Siege sales. The year, 1585. The problem? The Spanish army is besieging Antwerp. Shelling approaching merchant ships and causing food prices inside the city to rise. The solution? Enact strict price controls on food. Sounds like a great idea. With the best of intentions, what could possibly go wrong? It turns out merchants don't like risking their live ships and cargo, especially when their goods fetch the same prices at ports without incoming cannon fire. Artificially low prices also fuel demand, causing food supplies inside the city to plummet. It wasn't long before Antwerp surrendered, given the city government blockaded itself far better than any army ever could. Part 2. Chimney cheapskates. The year, 1662. The problem? Charles II needs more money. The solution? A hearth tax. Since the number of fireplaces in a building is considered a proxy for wealth, this progressive property tax scheme was sure to be a hit. Sounds like a great idea. With the best of intentions, what could possibly go wrong? It turns out people don't like paying taxes. They also don't like petty constables and subcontractors entering their homes to count stoves. Many stopped up their chimneys to avoid the taxes. One intrepid baker even knocked through the wall from her oven to access her neighbor's chimney, causing a fire that destroyed 20 homes and killed 4 people. And since the revenue generated was less than expected, it wasn't long before the hearth tax also went up in smoke. Part 3. Cash for clunkers. The year, 2009. The problem? A recession. And we need to save the environment. And domestic manufacturing. Plus something about economic inequality. And, maybe juice the re-election campaign. All that was the problem. The solution? Give away $1 billion in incentives to U.S. residents who destroy their old vehicles for more fuel-efficient new ones. Sounds like a great idea. With the best of intentions, what could possibly go wrong? It turns out people like free money. The program blew through the original allocation in less than a month. So Congress approved an additional $2 billion, which was gone a month later. Another thing people like? Driving their new cars. While the program did increase average fuel economy in the United States by 0.65 miles per gallon, total fuel consumption actually rose more than 800 million gallons in 2010. As for the economy, the boost in vehicle sales was fully offset by a fall-off once the program ended. In fact, for every job created, the government spent $1.4 million on the program. But did it help U.S. car manufacturers? Not really. Only 2 of the top 10 models sold as part of the program were domestic brands. And apparently, destroying an entire generation of used cars causes remaining used car prices to rise. But hey, those are just the kind of vehicles less affluent people buy. The kind donated to charities or sold to poor countries where they replace even older, less fuel-efficient vehicles. And about that re-election campaign? Well, I think it's important that we consider great moments and unintended consequences. Good intentions, bad results.
So I just came across this. They've got a bunch more where it talks about the consequences of just government action to fix short-term problems, but not actually fixing the underlying problems here. The underlying problem: government overspending by $1.9 trillion, almost $2 trillion in this last year alone. Why? What is the emergency? What do we have to do? We cannot just spend ourselves into oblivion without inflation, without worsening the economy. But again, neither party, Trump has finally started talking about cutting their government with Elon Musk. Neither party has solid plans. So price controls, rent controls, attacking the greedy corporations is all going to be very counterproductive. And I hope that this is not where candidate Harris is going with her campaign, but we will see, when she announces it tomorrow afternoon. So have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.